Before Umbrella became what it was, before the outbreaks, before any of it, there was James Marcus. Tonight, we're telling his complete story. The research, the obsession, the T-virus, and the betrayal that set everything else in motion. No loud noises, no jumps. Calm the whole way through. If you enjoy, hype, or like the video, each one means a lot. And I'm genuinely thankful for every one of you who takes the time. Section 1. The Scientist Before Umbrella. Part 1. The 1950s University Years. James Marcus was a quiet academic who spent his youth inside research labs. He didn't care for mainstream medicine because he found standard fields narrow. His early work focused entirely on cell mutation and biological blueprints. He wanted to uncover how microscopic pathogens could alter life. While studying at a prestigious university, he formed a tight alliance with two ambitious peers. Oswell Spencer brought massive wealth and an aristocratic pedigree to their circle. Edward Ashford brought a noble background and a sharp mind of his own. They stood apart from the rest of the student body. The three young men spent their nights discussing the hidden boundaries of evolution. They didn't view natural viruses as diseases to be eliminated by doctors. Instead, they saw them as raw clay, waiting to be sculpted by superior minds. Mainstream biology seemed slow and pointless compared to their plans. Each man inside the group harbored a distinct motivation for breaking these rules. Marcus cared only for pure science and cell manipulation. Spencer wanted to use their discoveries to build a global empire. Ashford hoped to find a medical tool to treat chronic conditions within their lifetime. They recognized that their ambitions required a real biological anchor to advance past theories. The university years provided the perfect foundation for their dangerous ideas. They graduated with a shared resolve to locate a unique catalyst. Their partnership was bound by a deep disdain for common medical practices. Part 2. The Summer at the Spencer Estate. Following their graduation, the three researchers gathered at Spencer's private manor for a summer retreat. The estate sat isolated among heavy forests, offering complete secrecy for their work. They spent their days inside the library, finalizing a radical thesis on human development. The quiet rooms became a hidden workshop for their collective ambition. Spencer used this retreat to present a dark vision of a world populated by perfected gods. He didn't want to improve existing society. He wanted to design an entirely new race. He intended to rule over this population as an absolute deity who controlled life and decay. Marcus ignored the political ego, focusing instead on the technical execution. The trio quickly recognized that known pathogens were insufficient to achieve their goals. They needed an undocumented agent that could completely rewrite a host's structure without causing instant death. Spencer revealed a lead about an ancient plant that grew only in Africa. He believed this flora held the secret to physical immortality. They agreed to launch a massive expedition to locate the plant. The project required significant capital, which Spencer provided through his private foundations. Marcus agreed to lead the scientific track on the ground, eager to test his mutation theories in a wild environment. They left Europe behind, moving toward an unmapped territory. The journey required months of preparation to secure the necessary logistics. They didn't tell any government agencies or medical boards about their travel plans. They were walking into an ancient world to steal a fire they didn't fully understand. The partnership was finalized under the shadow of Spencer's heavy stone manor. Section 2. The Progenitor Virus. Part 3. December the 4th, 1966. The expedition successfully breached the underground caverns of the Ndipaya kingdom on December 4th, 1966. The researchers moved through the royal ruins with heavy equipment, their lanterns cutting through the deep dark. Marcus led the team through the stone chambers, tracking reports of a sacred garden. The environment felt heavy with old dust and damp rot. Deep within the ancient ruins, Marcus discovered a rare flora that grew near the old altars. The Stairway to the Sun flower grew inside the subterranean garden. The local tribe guarded the plant with a brutal tradition, using its toxicity to select their leaders. Marcus didn't care for the local folklore, focusing entirely on the cell walls. He successfully isolated a volatile pathogen thriving within the plant's structure. He named the discovery the Progenitor Virus, recognizing it as the foundation for their evolution program. The virus possessed an RNA structure that could aggressively rewrite the genetic code of a cell. This moment marked the birth of modern biological warfare. The pathogen didn't act like a regular disease that simply destroyed the host's organs. It actively forced a mutation process that could make an organism stronger and faster if they survived the shock. Marcus observed the cellular transitions under his field microscope, his mind recording the extraction data streams. He knew he held an engine that could redefine history. The expedition secured the cargo, ready to transport it back to the European laboratories. Marcus guarded the steel canisters with his life, knowing the partnership had achieved its first milestone. Spencer counted the financial cost and smiled, his mind mapping out a corporate shield. The ancient garden fell silent again as the team packed their gear. Part 4. Brandon Bailey. Marcus's most brilliant student, Brandon Bailey, accompanied his mentor into the Ndipaya territory. Bailey was completely consumed by the academic prestige of the project, eager to make his own mark on virology. He sacrificed his youth to manage the logistical extraction pits inside the African caves. He didn't question the ethics of their work, trusting Marcus completely. The young researcher handled the hazardous task of harvesting the flowers under constant pressure. He lived in a camp built inside the ruins, surrounded by corporate mercenaries and hostile terrain. The work was physically exhausting, the spore dust coating his lungs as the weeks passed. He spent his nights analyzing the mutation metrics under a dim lamp. As a consequence of this arrangement, Bailey wouldn't return to normal society after the expedition concluded. Spencer recognized that the student knew too much about the source of the virus to be allowed to roam free. The billionaire forced him to remain permanently trapped inside the African labs to protect corporate secrecy. His academic dreams were traded for a lifetime of isolation. Bailey spent decades managing the continuous stream of raw virus samples back to their European offices. He watched his old peers advance through the company while he rotted beneath the stone floor. His letters home were intercepted by security teams, ensuring his family never learned his true coordinates. He became a ghost inside Umbrella's global network. His mental stability cracked under the pressure of his confinement, but he kept harvesting the flora. Marcus didn't intervene to save him, choosing his research over his students' freedom. The director needed the raw material Bailey extracted to keep his own projects active. The student remained a slave to the plant until his final days. Part 5. The immediate problem. Marcus quickly encountered a devastating scientific barrier when he returned to Europe. The progenitor virus couldn't be cultivated outside its native African soil, rendering standard laboratory methods useless. When grown in European incubators, the virus lost its gene-altering properties and died within hours. The pathogen required the unique minerals of the Ndipaya caverns to maintain its structure. This geographical limitation threatened to end their evolution project before it could scale. Marcus spent weeks trying to synthesize the soil components, but the virus refused to stabilize in his test tubes. The team couldn't rely on small samples shipped across the ocean in pressurized crates. They needed a constant supply of raw material to advance their research. The single limitation forced the three men to design a massive corporate front to hide their goals. They needed billions of dollars to fund a permanent extraction facility directly inside the African kingdom. They couldn't rely on private family wealth alone to maintain an operation of that scale. They needed a machine that generated continuous revenue. They founded Umbrella Pharmaceuticals to act as a legitimate front for their underground laboratories. The company sold consumer products, vitamins, and cosmetics to citizens who didn't understand the real business. The public face generated a clean reputation that kept government inspectors away from their gates. The profits were channeled directly into the dark sectors. Marcus accepted the corporate distraction because it granted him the massive resources he required. He left the financial management to Spencer, returning to his test tubes with a directed focus. The front company grew rapidly, establishing nodes in multiple countries within its first year. The immediate problem was solved by building a corporate mask. Section 3, Building Umbrella and the Training Facility, Part 6, March 23rd, 1967. Spencer officially announced the creation of Umbrella Pharmaceuticals on March 23rd, 1967. The public briefing presented a vision of medical innovation and consumer health that pleased the global markets. Shareholders invested millions into the new entity, believing they were funding a conventional pharmaceutical group. The corporate shield was locked into place with absolute legal precision. In his private diaries, Marcus wrote about the announcement with a cold cynicism that showed his true priorities. He viewed the public company as a loud, unnecessary distraction from his raw research into cell mutation. He hated the corporate meetings, the financial audits, and the marketing strategies Spencer forced onto their schedule. He wanted to remain in his lab, away from the lawyers. From day one, the organization held three competing agendas that couldn't coexist peacefully. Edward Ashford wanted to use the virus's regenerative properties to treat chronic disability and cure diseases. Marcus cared only for pure evolutionary science, viewing the human body as an experiment waiting to be perfected. Spencer wanted to use the pathogen as a political tool to achieve personal godhood. These conflicting intentions turned the board into a battleground for control. The partners watched each other with a rising suspicion, each man trying to secure the primary data streams. Marcus locked his files away, refusing to share his taxonomy sheets with Spencer's assistants. The corporate culture was toxic from its birth, built on an infrastructure of lies. Delivery trucks and medicine crates moved across the country, carrying the corporate logo. Marcus ignored the executive titles, focusing instead on his tubes and his journal entries. The company was alive, but the founders were already drawing lines inside the system. They used the public revenue to purchase land in the Arklay Mountains. Part 7, August 1968. In August of 1968, Spencer offered Marcus the directorship of a new facility. The Umbrella Executive Training Facility sat isolated inside the remote Arklay Mountains, away from the city lines. The billionaire presented the promotion as a reward for Marcus's scientific contributions to the company's catalogue. The position granted him absolute authority over the new candidates. Highly suspicious of the sudden offer, Marcus evaluated the move as a corporate trap to slide him out of the main loop. He knew Spencer wanted to centralize control over the primary laboratories in Europe. He accepted the directorship anyway, because it granted him complete isolation from executive oversight. The mountain facility became his private kingdom. He immediately converted the facility's vast basement network into a private, high-security laboratory area. He installed reinforced iron doors, custom water locks, and hidden drainage paths that didn't appear on the official blueprints. The corporate auditors didn't know what was happening beneath the classrooms, their reports tracking only the training budgets. The director spent his nights installing security measures. Marcus began diverting young corporate trainees to act as involuntary test subjects for his underground experiments. He picked candidates who lacked family ties or political connections that might trigger an investigation outside the mountains. He used the Progenitor Virus to test their physical limits, recording their cellular decay in his diary. The facility was a slaughterhouse disguised as a school. The empty buildings above his lab became an archive of decay, the grand architecture falling apart under the winter snows. The company abandoned the perimeter completely, leaving only a few cameras to monitor the old man's transitions. Marcus didn't care for the neglect, using the silence to deepen his research. He sat in his dark room, his hand checking his custom keys. Part 8. Edward Ashford's Death, 1968. Shortly after the training facility opened, Edward Ashford died after an accident inside his laboratory. The official corporate statement claimed he infected himself with a live strain of the Progenitor Virus during a routine experiment. The company managed the public exposure with absolute legal precision, burying his name away from the journals. His death reshaped the internal hierarchy of the business instantly. This incident was the first great betrayal of the company's history, an act of corporate elimination disguised as a mishap. Marcus wrote that Spencer intentionally sabotaged Ashford's safety protocols to clear his only moderate ally from the executive board. The billionaire wanted to eliminate a partner who held ethical reservations about their direction. The accident left Spencer in total control of the financial tracks. The loss left Marcus completely isolated inside the Arklay Mountains, stripped of his only scientific equal. He had to face Spencer's rising corporate greed without a safety net to balance the board. He knew his own position was vulnerable, forcing him to accelerate his research to protect his survival. The partnership was dead, replaced by a cold war between the remaining founders. The Ashford family's stake inside Umbrella was transferred to Alexander Ashford, Edward's young son. Alexander lacked his father's scientific genius or political strength, making him incredibly easy for Spencer to manipulate from the executive office. The family line was pushed out of the primary tracks, their resources diverted to an underground base in Antarctica. The son spent his budget on a private project. Marcus didn't leave the company after the loss, choosing instead to lock his lab doors and sink deeper into his work. He understood that his only protection was the data he held inside his vault. The first founder was gone, and the countdown had begun for the rest. He returned to his test tubes, his mind focused on finding a virus that secure his independence. Lady Break Time Duck 2's / Section 4, the T-Virus. Part 9, the Leech Obsession. Frustrated by the Progenitor Virus's extreme volatility, Marcus shifted his academic focus toward a primitive parasite. He spent his nights examining the biology of common leeches inside his private basement laboratory. He noted that their immune systems possessed an elastic capacity to absorb exterior genetic material without destroying their own host cells. The simple organisms became his primary model for gene rewriting. The isolated training facility provided the perfect environment to secretly breed thousands of these parasites away from corporate eyes. Marcus installed deep water vats inside the lower drainage networks, tracking their life cycle with absolute precision. He spent hours talking to the creatures in the dark, treating them like his only loyal companions. His diary entries became filled with details about their structures. He discovered that the leeches could share genetic data through a collective hive mind when they were exposed to the virus. This behavioral shift outpaced anything he had observed in standard animal models, giving him a clean direction for his research. He didn't tell Spencer's corporate auditors about the VAT rooms, hiding the budget lines under maintenance costs. The obsession turned the director into a total recluse, his human interactions fading behind his fixation on the swarm. He ignored the corporate trainees upstairs, leaving the management of the facility to his assistants while he sat by the water tanks. He believed the leeches held the key to bypassing the geographical limitations of the African flower. His mind was locked onto a final breakthrough. The assistants upstairs grew nervous as the director's behavior became more erratic over the weeks. He refused to share his progress with the executive board, keeping his tanks behind reinforced steel doors. He fed them his own cell samples to test their adaptation rate, his mind locked onto a final formula. The basement became a quiet sanctuary for a dangerous science. Loo break time, Doc 2s, / Part 10, September 19, 1978. The breakthrough occurred on September 19th, 1978, after a decade of isolation inside the mountains. Marcus successfully spliced live leech DNA directly into an active strain of the Progenitor Virus. The addition stabilized the pathogen completely, allowing it to easily bind with a host's central nervous system without destroying the tissue layout. The geographical limitation of the African soil was broken. This new strain maintained absolute structural stability outside of Africa, rendering the old extraction pipelines obsolete for his immediate research. The virus could now survive inside complex hosts, forcing a rapid transformation of their cell walls upon infection. Marcus recorded the event in his journal with a cold satisfaction that showed no human hesitation. He had built the engine he required. He named this revolutionary new strain the T-virus, short for tyrant, explicitly forecasting his desire to build an unstoppable army. He didn't design the pathogen to cure diseases or improve public health. He built it to create a biological weapon line that could project absolute force. The name was a declaration of war against Spencer's corporate network. The T-virus worked by keeping a host functional at a basic motor level while completely destroying their higher brain functions. What remained was an aggressive organism that lived only to consume, spread the infection, and execute commands. The practical applications for a weapons dealer were obvious to anyone in the executive rooms. An infected population required no salaries or logistics. He looked at the digital readout on the screen, his mind recording the successful integration of the two distinct genomes. The water inside the vats turned clear as the parasites absorbed the new strain, their bodies growing larger under the lamp. The countdown was no longer a theoretical problem for his enemies. It's a physical reality locked inside his tubes. Eddy break time 2s / Part 11, October 23rd, 1978. By October 23rd, 1978, Marcus concluded that animal testing was no longer yielding advanced mutation data. The T-virus had stabilized inside the leech hosts, but its interactions with human nervous systems remained an unconfirmed variable on his sheets. He needed to track how the pathogen rewrote human cells to finalize his biological weapons program. He couldn't advance his science without securing fresh human hosts for the basement vats. The director decided to exploit his position to bypass the standard rules of medical ethics. He initiated full-scale, illegal human experimentation inside the training facility, targeting the very corporate trainees sent to his management courses. He selected young candidates who lacked influential connections inside the company, picking them off one by one after their evening classes. Over a dozen trainees vanished into the lower laboratory zones without a trace. Their disappearance was managed by falsified corporate transfer documents that Marcus signed himself to satisfy the board. The empty classrooms upstairs stood as a silent shield for his work. The basements became an active slaughterhouse where the human element was reduced to pure raw material for his statistics. Marcus monitored their cellular destruction rate with an intense focus, recording every stage of their physical decay inside his personal journals. The infected subjects suffered a total collapse of their cognitive functions. Within a few hours of exposure, their skin turning grey as the fever consumed their cells. They lost their speech and their memories, their bodies guided only by a primitive hunger. He didn't limit his trials to adult candidates. targeting the children of low-level facility staff who lived inside the mountain quarters. He viewed their young tissue as a perfect blank canvas to map out the mutation potential of the T-virus strain. The cries from the cell blocks didn't disrupt his academic focus. His mind locked onto the delivery of a perfect weapon line. He treated their suffering as a minor price for his evolution goals, his humanity completely erased by his pride. The bodies of the dead test subjects were stripped of their corporate uniforms and prepared for an immediate disposal inside the waste channels. Marcus used the facility's underground drainage system to wash their remains away, ensuring that no physical evidence could reach Spencer's auditors. The water locks were cleared every Monday morning, leaving nothing behind but grey residue and rusted iron plates. The director managed the slaughter with a steady routine that kept his labs secure. The staff suspected that something dangerous was happening beneath the floorboards, but the corporate contracts enforced a mandatory silence. Marcus ignored their fears, his focus fixed on the readouts that recorded the stabilization of the strain. The human trials provided the raw data needed to perfect the formula, but they also finalized his isolation from the rest of the world. He spent his nights refining the delivery methods, his hands stained with the evidence of his crimes. Part 12. The First BOW. Using the finalized T-virus strain, Marcus engineered the world's first official bioorganic weapons inside his private laboratory. He didn't want to rely solely on human hosts, exploring how the pathogen could rewrite the genetic traits of completely different animal classes. He selected insects, amphibians, and primates to test the cross-species adaptability of his creation. The basement vats were filled with a collection of mutated wildlife that defied natural history, every specimen recording a new metric for his sheets. The experiments confirmed that the virus could act as a universal key to reshape biology. He built the plague crawler by injecting the virus directly into a fertilized arthropod host, hyper-accelerating its growth cycle. The resulting monster featured a massive, armored exoskeleton, segmented limbs that could slice through wood, and an aggressive predatory focus that made it an efficient hunter. This creature confirmed that the T-virus could scale simple organisms into deadly field assets that followed basic commands. The director recorded its reaction times with a sharp focus on his clipboard, noting the superior density of the new carapace. The Lurker program ran parallel to that work, utilizing common frog DNA as a baseline for a secondary bioweapon line. The amphibian host underwent an immediate physical mutation, its size multiplying until it could easily swallow a human target whole. Its skin became a thick hide that resisted minor kinetic impacts, turning an ordinary pond animal into an underwater predator that could clear a trench without noise. The Lurker proved that the virus could preserve an animal's natural traits, while amplifying its aggression to lethal levels. Marcus achieved his most alarming success with the creation of the Eliminator, a weapon built by infecting live simian primates with the virus. The T-virus didn't destroy the monkey's brainstem completely, preserving its natural agility and pack instincts while inflating its muscular structure. The Eliminator featured exposed muscle tissue, a calcified skull plate, and a single-minded fury that targeted any uninfected movement in the room. They operated in small packs, clearing the cell blocks with a terrifying speed that pleased the director. These prototype monsters confirmed that the T-virus was a versatile engine, capable of transforming any organic blueprint into a predatory asset for the weapons market. Marcus tested their combat efficiency inside controlled arenas beneath the training facility, recording their reaction speeds on his clipboards. He watched them tear through his remaining test subjects, his journal entries filled with praise for their absolute aggression. He kept these taxonomy records hidden from the executive board to protect his personal leverage against Spencer. The data gathered from these initial models allowed him to refine the transmission vectors of the strain. Every animal class he infected produced a new set of data points that confirmed the unlimited modification potential of his creation. The basement labs were no longer just a research area. They were a factory for a new generation of warfare assets. Marcus locked the display cages, his mind satisfied that he held the ultimate weapon against Spencer's corporate network. Section 5, The Power Struggle with Spencer, Part 13, November 30th, 1978. On November 30th, 1978, Marcus recorded a famous diary entry that exposed the total collapse of his relationship with his partner. The text was written with a frantic, shaky hand that revealed his rising paranoia and physical exhaustion. He explained that Oswell Spencer was actively plotting to steal his T-virus research to secure an absolute monopoly over the company's financial assets. The entry confirmed that the two founders were on an unavoidable collision course inside the executive branch. Marcus grew increasingly protective of his data streams, viewing every corporate directive from the European office as a hidden threat to his survival. He spent his days checking the security seals around his laboratory, convinced that Spencer's spies were active inside his staff list. He stopped attending the board meetings, choosing to remain in his basement kingdom with his gun within reach. The trust was entirely gone, replaced by a cold war that threatened to rupture the business from within. He locked his primary laboratory doors with custom security keys that required a complex series of chess movements and specific emblems to activate. He altered the facility's main water drainage paths to create an artificial barrier that'd drown any security squad trying to breach his vault from the outside. He hid his personal journals inside a secret wall compartment behind the leach display tanks, ensuring only his eyes could read the record. He cut off all communications with the executive handlers in Europe. The diary entry revealed a mind that was hyper-focused on a single goal: the complete destruction of Spencer's corporate empire. Marcus knew that if the billionaire secured the T-virus formula, his own utility to Umbrella'd be reduced to zero, turning him into a disposable asset that needed to be erased. He vowed to use his creation to burn the executive board before they could execute a hit on his office. His paranoia functioned as a physical wall that kept his remaining assistants at a safe distance. He began hoarding ballistic supplies and fuel assets inside the lower tunnels, preparing for a long siege against the company's paramilitary units. He trusted nobody inside the facility except for his two elite disciples, using them to manage his communications with the outside world. He believed his security measures were completely bulletproof, a permanent barrier that'd keep Spencer's lawyers away from his tubes. He sat by the display tanks, his mind locked onto a strategy of absolute defense. The tension inside the mountain facility reached a critical phase as the winter storms closed the roads. The staff could feel the weight of the director's isolation, every corridor heavy with the expectation of a sudden corporate strike. Marcus ignored their shifting glances, his eyes fixed on the water where his leeches swam. He closed his journal, his final lines a declaration of absolute defiance against the man who had sold his science. Part 14. The training facility shut down. Recognizing Marcus's rising instability and his refusal to transmit the research files, Spencer officially closed down the training facility. The executive order was delivered by a corporate legal team that arrived at the mountain estate without a warning, backed by a unit of armed security guards. The directive stripped the director of his official titles, reducing his status to a tenant inside an empty school. The company's machinery was moving to isolate his network from the main tracks completely. Spencer relocated the entire Core T virus project to a state-of-the-art facility built beneath his nearby mansion manor. The Arclay research facility possessed superior equipment, advanced containment fields, and a direct line to the European offices that bypassed Marcus's authority completely. The primary data streams were transferred to the new laboratories, leaving the old training grounds with only a fraction of their original assets. The center of power shifted across the woods within a single day, leaving Marcus stranded. Marcus refused to leave his basement lab, choosing to ignore the corporate eviction notice to continue his private research in total dark. He spent his years with a skeletal staff of loyal assistants who handled his basic logistics and fed the parasites. The classrooms upstairs grew cold, and the grand halls fell into a state of total neglect as the heat was turned off to cut costs. The facility became a concrete tomb for his old ambition, a ruined shell of its former glory. The shutdown ruined his operational network, cutting off his access to fresh corporate trainees for his human experiments. He was forced to rely on local wildlife and old samples to keep his leeches alive, his budgets monitored by Spencer's financial departments. Every asset he possessed was systematically stripped away by the executive handlers, his name removed from the company's public directories to ensure absolute isolation. He lived like a prisoner inside his own fortress, his movements recorded by hidden sensors. He spent the next decade living like a ghost inside the concrete ruins, his hair turning white as the damp cold took a toll on his health. He watched the mountain roads through his office window, his mind mapping out a campaign of retribution that'd punish his partner for the betrayal. He slowly refined his methods in total darkness, completely obsessed with creating a master strain that'd burn the empire. His connection to reality was fading behind his deep integration with the swarm. The empty buildings above his lab became an archive of decay, the grand architecture falling apart under the winter snows. The company abandoned the perimeter completely, leaving only a few cameras to monitor the old man's transitions. Marcus didn't care for the neglect, using the silence to deepen his focus. He sat in his dark room, his hand checking his keys as he prepared for a war that'd take 20 years to start. Part 15. Birkin credited to completely break Marcus's spirit and finalize his corporate erasure. Spencer altered Umbrella's official history books. The executive board issued a statement that publicly credited a young William Birkin as the sole developer of the T virus strain. The scientific journals and patent applications were rewritten to match this narrative, removing any mention of Marcus's decade of research inside the mountain facility. The true creator was systematically erased from the franchise's official timeline by an executive pen. This political maneuver stripped Marcus of his remaining professional dignity. Birkin accepted the stolen credit with a cold indifference that showed his own predatory ambition, his face appearing on the front pages of the corporate newsletters. He was granted a massive budget to run the Arclay laboratory. His name celebrated across the global pharmaceutical markets as a biological genius who had rewritten the future of medicine. Marcus watched the promotion from his exile, his mind poisoned by a venomous rage that destroyed his remaining stability. The old man realized his closest students had already chosen a side in the war. The erasure was a calculated psychological strike designed to force Marcus into a complete surrender of his remaining files. Spencer wanted to prove that a scientist meant nothing without the institutional power of the company behind his name. The official record turned the pioneer into a historical footnote, a nameless researcher who had merely provided the basic data for Birkin's superior evolution. The old man was dead to the world long before he was shot. His achievements became public property for the executive board. Marcus's name was blacklisted from all scientific conferences and internal memos, his voice stripped of any professional authority within the company he had helped found. If a young researcher asked about the old director of the training facility, they were met with a mandatory silence from the security teams. The corporate machinery had swallowed his legacy, transforming his fire into a common commodity that generated millions for Spencer's accounts. Every step of his career was buried beneath a layer of corporate legal protection. This total erasure drove the aging scientist into a state of absolute, venomous isolation inside his basement lab. He stopped writing formal reports, using his remaining pages to draft vows of vengeance against his former students and his partner. He viewed the entire organization as a toxic growth that needed to be liquidated to satisfy his honor. His mind completely detached from the rules of normal human behavior. He lived only for the destruction of the brand, his thoughts weaving into the hive. He stood by his display tanks every night, his hands shaking with a tremor that wasn't caused by the virus, but by pure hatred. He whispered his secrets to the dark water, knowing that his children were growing stronger under the lamp. The true history of the T-virus was locked away in his mind, a secret weapon that had soon break out of the mountains to burn the Empire. The old man waited in the shadows, his countdown nearing its absolute end. Part 16. The Isolation Years. Throughout the 1980s, Marcus lived like a ghost inside the rotting training facility. The grand halls above his workspace lost their heating as the corporate office cut off the operational budgets. Dust coated the wooden desks where elite trainees used to sit, while moisture cracked the plaster walls. He ignored the visible decay of the upper floors, choosing to spend his entire day locked behind the secure basement doors. The old school became a concrete vault that protected his remaining assets from executive oversight. Spencer's spies maintained a constant watch around the mountain estate to monitor the old man's transitions. Hidden cameras inside the courtyard recorded his limited movements, transmitting the security logs back to the European office. Marcus knew his files were compromised, so he hid his notebooks inside a hollow wall cavity behind the main water pipes. He minimized his daily contact with the outer world, treating every corporate memo as a direct threat to his life. His internal paranoia functioned as a physical wall that kept his remaining assistants at a safe distance. The isolated researcher spent his nights sitting beside the deep glass tanks where his parasites swam. He talked to the swarms in the dark, treating the collection of organisms like his only real children. The leeches responded to his vocal presence, gathering against the glass plates whenever he approached the waterline. He fed them his own blood samples to maintain their custom lineage, tracking their growth metrics with a small flashlight. The connection between the scientist and the swarm was hardening into a permanent bond away from the company's knowledge. He slowly refined his formula in total dark, bypassing the financial restrictions imposed by his former partner. He didn't rely on standard corporate supplies, using old equipment to cultivate the active strains. The virus inside the leeches was changing, its genetic structure adapting to the continuous stress of the isolated environment. He recorded these quiet transitions on loose pages that he locked away inside his metal desk. The research progressed without the authorization of the medical boards or the executive directors. His mind was completely fixed on building a master variant that'd shatter Spencer's corporate network. The old pride turned into a venomous rage that destroyed his remaining human relationships. He didn't want to fix the company or reclaim his old seat on the executive board. He wanted to execute a complete liquidation of the brand, turning their offices into a cemetery for the board members. His diary entries became a record of a scientist who had abandoned the rules of civilized society. The long years of confinement took a severe toll on his physical frame, leaving him with pale skin and a heavy tremor. He walked through the concrete tunnels with a slow gait, his fingers tracing the rusted pipes that managed the facility's waste system. He knew the company was celebrating Birkin's achievements, while his own name was buried away from the official history journals. The old man stood by his display tanks every night, his thoughts weaving directly into the hive. The countdown was nearing its absolute end inside the mountains. Section 6, Wesker and Birkin, Part 17. September 2nd, 1977. A 17-year-old Albert Wesker and a 15-year-old William Birkin arrived at the training facility on September 2nd, 1977. They walked through the front gates carrying elite corporate credentials from the European Management Branch. The young men displayed a cold confidence that set them apart from the regular staff members on the estate. Marcus monitored their arrival from his second-floor window, his mind evaluating their biological potential. The integration of these two candidates changed the pacing of the local operations instantly. The director immediately recognized that these two youths possessed a rare capacity for advanced development. Wesker displayed a calculated tactical focus, his movements deliberate and his expressions completely flat during his initial orientation. He didn't show any emotional vulnerability, tracking the facility's security layouts with an analytical eye. Marcus saw him as a perfect tool to navigate the company's internal networks. He believed the youth's discipline to protect his laboratory from external interference. Birkin presented a different asset to the team, showing a fierce scientific drive that outpaced his older peer. The 15-year-old candidate spent his initial hours inside the library, reading advanced mutation journals without taking a break. He didn't care for corporate rules or administrative titles, focused only on the cell structures on the sheets. Marcus recognized that this unhinged genius could handle the complex splicing sequences required for the progenitor strain. The youth's obsession mirrored the director's own early years at the university. The director viewed the new arrivals as his primary shield against Spencer's rising dominance over the company. He needed loyal assistants who could manage the laboratories without reporting back to the main executive offices. The executive board was trying to isolate his mountain branch, so he moved to secure the youths before they could be influenced by external lawyers. He signed their placement papers, locking them into his private department. He shared his resources to win their absolute loyalty. The teenagers took their places inside the advanced research teams, their skills optimizing the execution of the field trials. They handled the live virus strains with a steady routine that surprised the senior assistants on the staff. Marcus watched their progress with a deep interest, believing he had found the true heirs to his scientific legacy. The mountain facility held the best minds of the company, hidden away from public oversight. Their notebooks became a complete archive of the local breakthroughs. The entry logs from that winter recorded their continuous presence inside the central classroom structures. They didn't participate in the regular social activities of the trainees, choosing to spend their free time near the laboratory wings. Wesker monitored the facility's supply lines while Birkin assisted with the chemical solutions. They were moving toward the inner circle of the director's secret work. The trap was expanding, but Marcus only saw an opportunity to secure his independence. Part 18. The Mentorship. Marcus took both teenagers under his personal protection, granting them unrestricted access to his private basement laboratories. He bypassed the standard corporate security rules, allowing his disciples to clear the water locks without an executive pass. The young men spent their nights working beside his personal workbench, their notebooks filled with his private calculations. The basements became a secure sanctuary for their collective training, away from the board's reach. He shared his knowledge without the usual restrictions of corporate ownership. He taught them the foundational mechanics of gene manipulation, sharing biological insights he withheld from Umbrella's board. He explained how the prehistoric pathogen could fuse with different animal classes to stabilize the mutation process. The students observed the live leech trials under his personal supervision, tracking the cellular transitions on the monitors. He gave them the raw formulas that Spencer had spent millions trying to acquire. The mentorship was built on an absolute disclosure of his research. The relationship became closer as the winter storms isolated the mountain estate from the outer world. Marcus grew to trust the young men completely, viewing them as his intellectual sons and the future heirs to his science. He shared his private journals with them, discussing his theories on human rewrite without any academic hesitation. He believed their loyalty to his mentorship transcend the political games of the company. The old man's pride made him vulnerable to their questions. The youths managed the day-to-day operations of the basement vats, their technical skills allowing the director to focus on the master strain. Birkin perfected the extraction sequences, while Wesker calibrated the security sensors around the cages. They handled the infected test subjects with a cold routine that mirrored their teacher's outlook on ethics. The cell blocks were quiet under their management, the evidence buried inside the drainage channels. They executed his directives without asking about the safety protocols. Marcus didn't realize that his open guidance was giving his students the exact data streams they needed to replicate his work elsewhere. He viewed their constant note-taking as a sign of academic respect, missing the tactical focus behind their questions. He let them copy the baseline DNA maps of the optimized parasites, believing the researched remain inside his fortress. The old man's pride made him blind to the board's reach across the mountains. He treated them as his partners, not his competitors. The lessons continued until the tyrant strain reached a stable phase inside the laboratory tubes. The students had mastered the splicing sequences, their notebooks containing a complete record of the director's achievements. Marcus stood beside them at the workbench, confident that his legacy was secure against any executive strike from Europe. He didn't know that his inner sanctuary had already been converted into an open book for his enemies. Part 19. The Spying. The mentorship was a calculated lie designed by the executive branch to eliminate the director's leverage. Wesker and Birkin were undercover plants who reported directly to Oswell Spencer from their first day in the mountains. While pretending to be Marcus's most loyal disciples, they were actively cataloguing his security protocols for the European office. Their academic devotion was a mask built to satisfy the old man's ego. They used his trust to dismantle his defenses from within. The young men used their evening shifts to map out the facility's water drainage networks and subterranean layouts. Wesker recorded the precise passcodes for the electronic doors, tracking how the water locks managed the access to the vaults. He transmitted these security metrics back to Spencer's executive team via encrypted radio channels. The old man's private kingdom was being systematically dismantled from the inside by his sons. Every door configuration was logged onto corporate sheets. Birkin focused entirely on copying the technical data streams from the director's central lab terminal. He duplicated the leech DNA maps and the mutation logs, while Marcus slept inside his upper office quarters. The youth fed the scientific breakthroughs directly to the Arclay laboratory teams who were building a duplicate facility beneath the nearby mansion. The true formula was stolen long before the company shut down the base. The creation of the duplicate strain proceeded without Marcus's knowledge. The spying continued for over a decade without triggering a single alarm inside the mountain perimeter. The students maintained their regular presentation routines, delivering falsified reports to Marcus to keep his suspicion low. They watched their teacher sink deeper into his paranoia, using his internal fears to secure more access to the vault rooms. Every secret the old man held was logged onto corporate reels. They managed the information loop to protect their placement. They didn't feel a single trace of moral hesitation as they monitored their mentor's mental decline. They viewed him as an obsolete relic who was blocking the natural expansion of the company's bioweapon catalog. Wesker saw the assignment as a stepping stone for his own military advancement, while Birkin wanted the resources Spencer promised to fund his personal research. The old man was a barrier they needed to clear to secure their crowns. Their loyalty belonged entirely to the highest corporate bidder. The data files they gathered allowed Spencer to prepare a final strike against the training facility's independence. The billionaire knew the exact location of every sample case and every personal journal hidden inside the masonry walls. The students finalized their mapping project during the autumn of 1988, their reports confirming that Marcus had completed his work. The trap was locked, waiting for the signal from the executive office. The old man's legacy had been swallowed by the brand. Part 20, February 11th, 1978. On February 11th, 1978, Marcus discovered that the high-level security measures around his main laboratory had been altered. He found a set of custom water valves out of position during his morning rounds through the lower trenches. The lock indicators showed that an unauthorized user had bypassed the main computer terminal while the building was quiet. The discovery triggered an immediate spike in his internal paranoia. He realized his fortress was no longer a secure vault. Strung out by exhaustion and the initial growth of his fears, the director failed to identify the true source of the breach. He assumed that Spencer had deployed an external theft team from Europe to slip past his outer guard posts. He didn't suspect his own students, choosing to believe that their academic bond would protect his laboratory from corporate politics. He spent his hours adjusting the outer camera angles instead of clearing his staff list. His anxiety blinded him to the immediate threat beside his desk. His fatal mistake was refusing to terminate their security access codes immediately after recording the incident. He kept Wesker and Birkin inside his inner circle, allowing them to retain their custom keys to the display vault rooms. He believed their presence was his only defense against the company's lawyers, relying on them to manage the laboratory's automated defense grids. The old man's misplaced trust left his throat completely exposed to their blades. He chose to protect his research tracking rather than his personal safety. The students used this window to adjust their tracking methods, completing their final extraction logs under his nose. Wesker replaced the tampered seals with matching corporate tags to hide their progress from the remaining facility guards. They knew their mentor's mind was failing, using his fixation on Spencer to mask their own movements inside the room. The breach was a total success, securing the remaining data streams for the mansion team. The old man signed the transfer documents without checking the entries. Marcus responded to the event by adding more mechanical locks to his personal safe boxes, using complex combinations that required a long process to open. He sat inside his office with his handgun on the desk, his eyes monitoring the empty hallways through the glass panels. He wrote a frantic entry in his journal, vowing to execute any spy who crossed his threshold. The real traitors were standing beside him, checking his gauges. He locked the doors, unaware that the keys had already been copied. The incident report was filed away inside Spencer's private office, confirming that the director had lost control of his perimeter. The billionaire recognized that Marcus was too distracted by his fears to detect the domestic strike being prepared against his office. The students finalized their baseline copies, their work inside the training facility nearing its end as the virus stabilized inside the vats. The data was safe inside the mansion, leaving the pioneer with an empty crown. Section 7, The Connections, Part 21. Since at least 1986. Since at least 1986, Marcus secretly entered negotiations with an independent criminal syndicate known as the F Foundation. Desperate for funding to bypass Spencer's strict financial restrictions, the aging scientist chose to look outside the company's network for help. He needed specialized equipment and fresh research assets to advance his private master virus project away from the mountain base. The syndicate provided a back channel for his survival under the shadow of the board's audits. He turned to a rival organization to fund his vengeance. Marcus began selling confidential umbrella data streams in exchange for black market laboratory components and unmonitored resources. He transmitted historical progenitor files and mutation metrics to the group's local handlers during covert meetings near the mountain trails. The syndicate, which later evolved into the bioweapon network called the Connections, used his formulas to kickstart their own illicit research programs. The pioneer was trading his employer's assets to secure his autonomy inside the ruins. He didn't care about corporate loyalty anymore, focused only on his vats. The transaction stayed hidden for several years because Marcus utilized his custom water locks to hide the incoming shipping crates from the facility guards. He installed the black market centrifuges inside a hidden section of the lower drainage vaults, working after his remaining staff had left the block. He believed this independent arrangement would grant him the power needed to launch a strike against Spencer's European headquarters. The basement held a duplicate production line that didn't appear on the company's maps. He hid the resource drainage under general maintenance costs. Spencer's global intelligence network discovered the treason after intercepting an encrypted data clip moving across the eastern border. The billionaire realized that the old director had ceased being a simple annoyance inside an empty school, transforming into a dangerous liability that threatened the company's market monopoly. The files Marcus sold could expose the entire umbrella conspiracy to rival pharmaceutical groups, ruining 30 years of corporate secrecy. The administrative handlers tracked the leak back to the mountain facility. The old man had crossed a line that the board couldn't ignore. The discovery finalized the executive board's decision to liquidate the first founder without a legal trial or a corporate warning. Spencer issued an immediate order to freeze the remaining training facility accounts, cutting off the last legitimate supply lines to the mountain estate. The old man was officially classified as a traitor to the brand, his security status reduced to a target that needed to be erased. The billionaire turned to his security chiefs to organize a terminal solution for the cell. The legacy was marked for immediate destruction. Marcus remained unaware that his secret dealings had been logged by the corporate offices, continuing his laboratory routine with a false sense of security. He believed his relationship with the syndicate gave him a permanent safety net against any executive strike from Europe. He didn't realize that his treason had given his partner the perfect justification to execute an assault against his office. He sat by his tanks, his notes detailing a final formula that had never reached the market. The countdown was over for his independent track. Section 8, The Assassination Part, 22, 1988. By the spring of 1988, Marcus's private research reached a level of stability that satisfied the corporate metrics. The tyrant strain formula was complete, its transmission patterns and mutation rates fully mapped out across his personal spreadsheets. With William Birkin now fully capable of replicating the entire pathogen line at the nearby Arclay facility, James Marcus was officially declared a loose end by the executive board. His technical contributions were no longer required to sustain the company's catalogue. Spencer moved quickly to consolidate absolute control over the company's bioweapon portfolio before the syndicate could exploit the data. He signed a formal execution order inside his European estate, directing his security chiefs to finalize the liquidation of the training facility network. The directive required the total destruction of Marcus's personal staff and the immediate recovery of his master virus samples. The billionaire wanted to secure his monopoly before the leaks reached the public markets. The power balance was about to be locked forever. The billionaire wanted to ensure that the pioneer's name was permanently removed from the official history of the brand. He assigned the execution task to a specialized strike unit that possessed no public ties to the standard pharmaceutical operations. The operation was handled with an absolute administrative coldness, treating the death of a founder like a routine asset recovery phase. The old man's utility had reached zero, his achievements transferred to a younger face. The corporate machinery moved to erase his existence from the payroll. The tracking data compiled by Wesker and Birkin over the past 10 years provided the squad with the exact coordinates of his lab defenses. They knew his personal habits, his blind spots, and the precise codes needed to bypass the custom water locks without triggering the main alarms. The target was trapped inside his own fortress, his security system completely compromised by the youths he had trained. He didn't see the deployment lines expanding around his perimeter gates. His fortress had become his cage. Marcus spent his final weekend working beside his main display tanks, his journal entry from that morning showing no knowledge of the impending assault. He believed his mechanical locks hold the threshold against any legal team Spencer might deploy to clear his office. The aging scientist was a prisoner of his own arrogance, his focus locked onto the water where his parasites swam. He checked the gauges, his calculations focused on a future that had never arrived. The dark halls above his workspace remained perfectly silent. The execution order reached the local command base on a rainy Monday morning, initiating the final transition for the training facility. The security teams cut the external phone lines and locked the perimeter gates, isolating the mountain estate from any civilian oversight. The students took their places near the monitoring station, ready to witness the termination of their master's career. Marcus adjusted his lab coat, his hand steady on his pen as he opened his logbook. The strike team entered the maintenance shafts without noise. Part 23. The USS Kill Squad. A specialized umbrella security service strike team breached the basement laboratory doors on a quiet Monday morning. The soldiers moved through the stone hallway with a silent discipline, their submachine guns raised to scan the workbench counters. They didn't offer a corporate warning or demand a surrender of the files, executing their deployment lines with a practiced routine. The iron doors fractured under their kinetic entry tools, filling the air with concrete dust. The security grid failed as the main power lines were cut. Marcus stood beside his main display tanks when the squad entered the room, his hand still holding a chemical clipboard. He didn't have time to reach for the weapon on his desk before the lead soldier opened fire at close range. The high-caliber machine gun fire riddled his body, shattering his bones and tearing through his white lab coat within a single second. The glass tanks cracked under the impact of the stray bullets, releasing the water across the floorboards. The director collapsed into the debris without a single word of defense. The aging scientist lay on the linoleum floor, his blood pooling around the shattered glass and the chemical residue of his experiments. He gasped for air as his lungs collapsed under the trauma of the ballistic wounds, his fingers twitching in the cold fluid. He looked up through the smoke, his failing vision recording a sudden movement near the threshold of the room. Two familiar figures stepped from the shadows to inspect the remains. The old man realized his time had run out before he could use his leverage. Albert Wesker and William Birkin stood over their bleeding mentor, their expressions completely flat as they watched his life drain away. They didn't offer a word of comfort or show a single trace of human remorse for the old man who had treated them like sons. They stood like cold executives monitoring a successful asset liquidation phase for their employer. The mentorship was finalized with an absolute silence on the bloody floor. They watched his eyes glaze over, their loyalty to Spencer locked into place. Birkin stepped over the dying form to secure the master virus samples from the refrigeration unit, his hands steady as he packed the containers. He checked the data logs on the central terminal, ensuring every byte of Marcus's private research was transferred onto corporate reels. Wesker monitored the hallway sensors, his handgun ready to clear any remaining facility staff members who might cross their perimeter line. They secured the assets before the security unit finalized the cleanup phase. The true formula belonged entirely to their new department. Marcus used his final breaths to stare at his disciples, his mind recording their complete betrayal in his last conscious seconds. The old hatred hardened into a permanent thought as his heart stopped beating, his identity swallowed by an absolute desire for retribution against their names. The soldiers lowered their weapons, their assignment finished as the laboratory equipment hissed in the dark. The formula was safe, and the creator's voice was silenced forever. The frame went still in the water, his reign over the facility over. Part 24, The Disposal. The strike team dragged Marcus's heavy corpse through the lower maintenance tunnels to reach the facility's lowest point. They moved past the rusted drainage valves and iron grates, their heavy boots splashing through the industrial waste that pooled on the concrete. The environment was a dark void beneath the laboratory tracks, designed to manage the refuse of the mountain base. They handled the body like common corporate trash, ignoring the academic titles he had held for decades. The cleanup operation proceeded without a single trace of respect for the pioneer. They dumped his lifeless frame into a fast-moving underground river channel that fed directly into the mountain waste network. The cold water swallowed his body instantly, dragging his ruined uniform through the stone pipes away from the lab perimeters. The current was strong enough to wash away any forensic evidence before an inspection could occur. The disposal was executed with an absolute logistical precision that left no tracks inside the facility logs. The stream carried the first founder away from his kingdom in the dark. The soldiers threw his experimental master leech cultures into the dark water alongside his bleeding torso. The display tanks were cleared completely, the glass shards swept into the channel to sanitize the room for future corporate projects. The parasites swarmed inside the current, their bodies clinging to the torn fabric of their creator's coat as they moved down the subterranean pipeline. They fed on the residue of his wounds, their cells absorbing the fresh fluid. The laboratory was stripped of his existence within a few hours. By Monday evening, Spencer's administrative handlers had expunged every trace of Marcus's name from Umbrella's official payroll systems. They shredded his employment files, cancelled his security access passes, and deleted his research history from the central mainframes. The official corporate record was rewritten to show that the training facility had been abandoned for years due to a structural failure inside the foundations. The brand moved forward without his presence, its stock values rising as Birkin's duplicate experiments began at the mansion. The company finalized his corporate erasure by threat of immediate termination against any staff member who spoke his name inside the Arclay sector. He became a non-person within the industry he had helped build, his historic achievements credited to the teenagers who had watched him bleed out. Every step of his career was buried beneath a layer of corporate legal protection that kept inspectors away from the mountain trails. The asset recovery phase was locked, and the true history was hidden inside the executive vaults. The body settled into a deep stone cleft inside the subterranean channel, hidden away from the light of the sun for 10 long years. The mountain waste system became a quiet cemetery for his pride, the water washing over his bones with a monotonous rhythm. The world forgot about the old director, but his final creation was still alive inside the dark, adapting to the flesh of its master. The parasites remained inside the silt, their collective will waiting for the alignment of the cells. Section 9, The Queen, Leech, Part 25, What Actually Happened. As Marcus's body lay inside the subterranean river channel, a unique biological event occurred beneath the floorboards. His prized creation, the genetically modified Queen Leech, crawled into the open machine gun wounds to escape the fast current. The parasite began a 10-year process of cellular absorption inside the dark stone vault. The environment provided complete isolation for the pathogen's development, away from any external disruption or corporate audit. The wet organisms gathered around the torso, their movements guided by a primitive attraction. The live tyrant strain, locked inside the leech's cells, began to slowly digest Marcus's decaying tissue over the years. The pathogen didn't simply consume the meat. It broke down his cellular wall to harvest his genetic material with a systematic regularity. The virus functioned as a chemical bridge between the two distinct animal classes, rewriting the parasite's internal blueprint to accommodate the human data. The river water washed over the transformation, masking the heat generated by the rapid division. The physical structure of the corpse was broken down to fund the evolution. The organism successfully bonded his memories, motor habits, and neural pathways directly into its own cellular matrix. The structural integration occurred at a microscopic level. Every strand of the doctor's DNA woven into the parasite's nervous filaments. The leech's brainstem expanded to store the stolen thoughts, building a living archive of the scientist's life. The dead man's mind was being recycled into a new host form that lacked human limitations. Every secret he had locked away inside his office terminal was transcribed onto their cells. The decade of fusion altered the biology of the parasite completely, turning it into an apex predator that outpaced standard bioweapons. It didn't lose its structure like the European strains, its stability guaranteed by the unique elasticity of the leech genome. It grew larger inside the concrete trench, its skin absorbing the chemical refuse from the upper laboratories to fund its metabolic changes. The environment was a womb for an empire's ruin, hidden away from the world's knowledge. The swarm maintained a silent presence inside the dark mud. The tyrant strain hyper-accelerated the healthy division of the combined cells, creating an entity that possessed a dual identity. The parasite could manage the host's motor memories with an absolute precision, its reflexes tuned to the old man's physical habits. It spent 10 years inside the dark water, its conscious will slowly awakening as the neural networks finalized their alignment. The old labs upstairs remained empty, while the monster formed below, its thoughts focusing on a strategy of absolute retribution. The countdown was moving toward its release phase. The biological record of this fusion establishes a new paradigm for viral adaptation within the franchise history. It proved that the tyrant strain could act as an evolutionary tool to preserve a mind after the complete cessation of human life. The entity remained hidden inside the dark rocks, its body preparing to break out of the mountain's sewers, to execute a campaign that had been drafted in blood. The stream carried the new master back toward the thresholds of his old school. Part 26. The Confirmed Question. This intricate cellular fusion introduces a critical truth regarding the events that occurred inside the mountains during 1998. The entity that awoke inside the subterranean channel wasn't James Marcus returning from the grave. The real doctor died permanently on that Monday morning in 1988, when the machine gun fire destroyed his lungs. His conscious existence ended on the linoleum floor of his laboratory, his body reduced to raw material for the water. His human identity could not be restored by the virus. What emerged from the dark water was a highly evolved parasite that had absorbed his genetic memory so perfectly that it genuinely believed it was the scientist. The creature possessed no human empathy or independent moral constraints, operating purely as a biological mirror of Marcus's final dying thoughts. It's an engine of pure retribution, built from the residue of an old man's hatred. The distinction matters for everything that followed across the regional facilities, turning a private grudge into a public hazard. The monster was a product of corporate execution methods. The creature looked at its new hands with a detached focus, its mind filled with the images of the assassination and the faces of the trainees who had betrayed his trust. It didn't hold any independent goals or desires outside the complete destruction of Spencer's corporate empire. Every thought it generated was a copy of the director's final vows, its identity completely synchronized with a dead man's ghost. It sat inside the damp corridor, its skin shifting as the internal parasites adjusted their alignment. The old labs upstairs were about to feel its weight. The entity managed the surrounding leech swarms through a telepathic frequency that simulated the old director's authority. The parasites responded to its silent commands with an absolute discipline, moving across the concrete floors like a single coordinated muscle. It didn't require verbal markers to direct its line, its will passing through the water to coordinate the initial strikes against the company's local facilities. The collective mind functioned as a unified weapon that targeted their security checkpoints. The perimeter guards were completely blind to the threat. This biological mirror lacked any connection to normal human development, its entire personality restricted to a single emotion of venomous rage. It looked up at the empty training grounds with a cold resolve to initiate a corporate apocalypse that had punished the executive board. The real Marcus was gone, but his hatred had found a physical vessel that was far more dangerous than any human soldier. It adjusted its posture, its ears listening to the low hum of the train tracks that ran along the ridge. The operational phase was locked into place. The parasite took its first steps through the lower maintenance tunnels, its body preparing to navigate the upper classrooms where its campaigned launch. It didn't care for the global balance of power or the laws of the administration, focused only on the liquidation of the brand. The countdown had initialized for the second generation of Umbrella's leaders, the script written inside the dark river channels. The entity climbed the rusted ladder, its eyes clear of any human hesitation as it reached the surface. The trap lay open for the company's assets. Part 27. The Younger Body. The stabilization of the tyrant strain inside the queen parasite allowed the organism to manage its cell division with a unique precision. The virus hyper-accelerated the healthy growth of the tissue blocks rather than causing the standard decay seen in common infected hosts. It didn't destroy the baseline code of the marrow, utilizing the genetic memory of the dead scientist to structure the new frame. This biological mechanism built an organic vessel that completely bypassed the cellular limits of their previous research tracks. The creature reconstructed its exterior appearance using the physical parameters of Marcus during his early 20s. This specific age represented the peak of the pioneer's biological efficiency and mental focus before his university years ended. Thousands of independent parasites wove their structures together to build the muscles and the skin of the youthful shape. The soft skin hid a fluid mass of grey filaments that could alter their structural alignment in a single second. This youthful frame functioned as an apex demonstration of adaptability within the franchise history. The transition wasn't a slow mutation process, requiring only a single neurological command that passed through the collective hive mind without any lag. The entity could seamlessly dissolve its solid facade into a crawling swarm of grey parasites to bypass physical barriers. The environment inside the wet maintenance tunnels accommodated the constant shifting of the combined tissue layout. The entity didn't suffer the cognitive degradation that claimed regular test subjects during a viral outbreak. The brain's stem remained stable under the continuous energy loop generated by the primary queen parasite inside the torso. It retained the full intellectual capacity of the dead scientist, allowing the creature to handle complex laboratory networks. The eyes stayed completely clear of the cloudy film that usually marked the company's lower bioweapon models. The smooth skin of the younger body maintained a natural temperature that matched a living human being. This physical feat completely outpaced the parallel research tracks being managed inside the mansion laboratories across the valley. The company's main teams didn't understand that a parasite could reconstruct a human skeleton from old marrow. The fluid inside the reconstructed veins was a toxic cocktail of blood and raw virus that sustained the swarm. The physical presence of the younger shape was a silent threat waiting to enter the surface sectors. It spent its final days inside the stone cleft, calibrating its motor reflexes to ensure absolute control over the limbs. The creature wasn't a simple zombie, possessing the exact vocal tones and the steady stride of the pioneer before his corporate betrayal. The transformation was complete, leaving the dark river channel empty as the creature prepared to launch its operation. Section 10. The Revenge Part. 28. The Revenge. In May of 1998, the Marcus entity emerged from the deep water channels to enter the training facility. The damp spring air moved through the broken windows, rustling the dusty papers left on the abandoned desks. It looked down at its reconstructed hands, the sensory nodes registering the texture of the iron rails. The heavy silence of the empty classrooms wasn't a surprise, standing as a quiet record of the company's long neglect. The creature stood inside the old director's office, its eyes tracking the mountain roads through the dirty glass. It felt the full weight of the dead scientist's memories, every detail of the assassination flashing across its matrix. The ancient thoughts of the pioneer had become its absolute command, directing its focus toward a single milestone. It vowed to execute a campaign of total terror that had burned Spencer's entire corporate empire to the ground. The strategy required a systematic strike against the company's regional assets to compromise their operational security. The entity didn't rush into a loud assault, choosing to manipulate the facility layout to build a trap. It restored power to the lower gate systems, using the custom keys hidden inside the wall cavities. The dark galleries upstairs became an active arena where the gathering forces prepared to clear the thresholds. It began coordinating the distribution of the leech swarms across the perimeter zones to isolate the sector. The parasites scuttled through the ventilation shafts, their movements managed by the telepathic frequency of the Queen. The environment was transforming into a secure outpost for its war, away from the knowledge of the board. It prepared the initial batches of the optimized strain, ensuring the pathogen wasn't vulnerable to standard countermeasures. The entity viewed the entire valley as a massive testing ground to validate the power of its creation. It didn't feel a single trace of human hesitation, its personality restricted to a desire for retribution. The legacy that Spencer had stolen was about to become a fluid fire that'd liquidate their financial assets. It sat behind the central monitor desk, its plans locked into place as the night hours passed. The countdown for the first phase of the campaign was finalized as the evening rain hit the battlements. The entity adjusted its noble uniform, its stride firm as it moved toward the maintenance tunnels. The long exile was over, and the master had returned to clear the board of his corporate enemies. The empty school wasn't quiet anymore, its rooms alive with the sound of 1,000 shifting carapaces. Part 29. Infiltrating the Arclay mansion. The entity launched its primary strike by leaking an aggressive variant of the strain into the mansion ventilation shafts. The pathogen drifted through the secure basement sectors, infecting the researchers before the automated alarms could activate. The staff members collapsed at their workbenches, their skin turning grey as the fever consumed their cells. The Arclay laboratory wasn't a secure zone anymore, becoming an unmonitored slaughterhouse within a few days as its security systems failed. The specific leak utilized the volatile V-Act strain of the virus to trigger a secondary mutation path. When the infected scientists suffered a cessation of their vital signs, the pathogen didn't allow the tissue to rot. It initiated a rapid rebuilding of the muscular system, forcing the corpses back onto their feet with speed. The resulting crimson heads featured sharp claws, red skin coloration, and an aggressive predatory focus that cleared rooms. These enhanced predators prowled the stone corridors beneath the Spencer mansion, their movements guided by a primitive hunger. They tore through the remaining security units, closing the extraction lines for the managers who tried to escape. The environment wasn't safe for the corporate handlers, turning a luxury estate into a permanent tomb for data. The infection spread into the surrounding forest, creating a hazard that the containment fields couldn't block. This calculated action initiated the exact chain of events that led to the deployment of law enforcement teams. The entity monitored the spreading panic from its remote terminal, watching the regional command node lose control. The company's directors in Europe couldn't block the exposure, their political shield failing as the bodies accumulated. The mansion incident was a direct consequence of this release, a visceral record of the old man's power. The outbreak ruined the operational timeline for Birkin's ongoing trials, forcing him to lock down his city lab. The duplicate research he had celebrated wasn't enough to save his team from the spreading biological crisis. The old director's vengeance was moving through the masonry, recording a complete liquidation of their security protocols. The corporate front was beginning to fracture under the pressure of a threat they hadn't accounted for. The forest trails became a closed perimeter, where the wild animals mutated into armored stalkers under the leak. The entity had successfully severed the connection between the executive branch and their primary laboratory asset. The mansion stood silent under the mountain sky, its rooms filled with the sound of dragging footsteps. The second generation of leaders wasn't ready for the scythe that was clearing the paths across the valley. Part 30. The Training Facility Outbreak. On July 21st, 1998, the entity expanded its operations by releasing thousands of infected leeches into the facility. The parasites flooded the stone classrooms and the central library, their bodies coating the wooden panels with residue. They waited in the dark corners for the arrival of the corporate cleanup teams sent by the board. The environment wasn't a simple school anymore, operating as a quiet trap prepared for the company's assets. An elite Umbrella Security Service investigation unit entered the base under directives from Wesker to reactivate systems. The soldiers moved through the main hall with a professional discipline, their automatic rifles raised to scan galleries. They believed they were handling a routine security verification inside an abandoned school away from the city. They didn't see the distortions inside the water drainage grates that lined the stone floor blocks below. The swarm launched a synchronized strike from the ceiling arches, the leeches dropping onto the helmets of the unit. The parasites used their maws to pierce the protective gear, injecting the tyrant strain directly into their veins. The high-caliber weapons weren't useful against a fluid horde that ignored the kinetic impact of the ballistic shots. The tactical squad dissolved into a frantic panic as the masks were torn away by the writhing mass. The infection consumed the entire security unit within a few minutes of the initial contact inside the hall. Their motor memories were hijacked by the collective hive mind, forcing them to guard the thresholds against intruders. The entity had successfully liquidated the tactical response team, permanent closing down Umbrella's logistical grip on the sector. The base wasn't an open book for the corporate auditors, turning into a secure fortress for the swarm. This active strike created a perimeter of monsters that isolated the mountain trails from the nearby city limits. The robed zealots from the lower crypts joined the infected soldiers, their low-frequency prayers echoing through vaults. The facility wasn't an archive of corporate waste, operating as a factory for a new generation of assets. The old director managed the lines from his display room, his mind satisfied with the technical execution. The failure of the cleanup unit triggered immediate alarm inside the mansion command center, forcing a tactical shift. Wesker realized that an independent force was managing the outbreak with a deep knowledge of their security parameters. He didn't waste time trying to save the base, his focus shifting toward his own survival plans. The entity watched the monitors, its face fixed in a flat expression as the next phase neared. Part 31. The Ecliptic Express. The entity targeted the Ecliptic Express as the vehicle moved along the mountain ridge during the night hours. The private corporate train carried high-level executives and research staff between the regional facilities and the city. The luxury cars featured expensive wood panels, brass fixtures, and secure communication terminals for the managers. The passengers believed their transit was shielded by the company's private contracts, but they weren't safe here. Swarms of infected leeches smashed through the glass windows of the moving train, filling the cars with fluid. The parasites targeted the passengers with an absolute coordination, their teeth tearing through clothing to reach the skin. The executives were slaughtered inside their seats before they could transmit a distress signal to the main mainframe. The carpeted floors weren't clean anymore, covered in the grey residue of the swarm and the blood of victims. The Marcus entity appeared on the roof of the stranded locomotive, his youthful image lit by the storm. He openly mocked the dying cries of his victims, his voice a calm echo that carried no remorse. He didn't limit the collateral damage of his campaign, choosing to treat the civilian staff like raw material. The attack wasn't a minor incident, confirming that his strategy had expanded into a total, indiscriminate bloodbath. The locomotive engine was left to drift along the tracks, without manual control, its brakes disabled by parasites. The train became a mobile cemetery that moved through the forest, its power systems failing under the weight. The entity used the crisis to attract the attention of his former disciples, creating a visual marker. He wasn't hiding behind the water locks of the lower basements anymore, stepping into the light of day. The strike proved that the creature was willing to project absolute force across the public transport sectors. It wanted to break the corporate shield Spencer had spent 30 years constructing around his private laboratory lines. The luxury train wasn't an asset for the business, transforming into a visceral record of the cell's decay. The lines were permanently severed, leaving the mountain tracks open to the growth of the prehistoric infection. The passengers who survived the initial strike mutated into standard infected drones within a few hours of exposure. They wandered through the narrow corridors of the cars, their motor habits guided by the primitive hunger. They brandished broken glass and metal rods, their human identity completely erased by the tyrant strain. The Ecliptic Express didn't reach its city destination. coming to a sudden halt near the facility platforms. Part 32. The transmission. Utilizing the old security feeds built into the facility infrastructure, the entity broadcast its signal directly to managers. The youthful image of James Marcus appeared on the main monitor screens inside the mansion command center. The transition was immediate, cutting through the encryption blocks with an absolute technological precision that surprised them. The corporate disciples weren't ready for the interruption, their screens flickering as the local data loop failed. The creature openly promised to make them suffer for the Monday morning assault that had ended his life. It spoke with the precise vocal markers of their old master, its words a calm declaration of retribution. It reminded them that the legacy they had celebrated wasn't their own property, but a stolen formula. The transmission didn't offer a trade contract or a political negotiation, focusing only on their impending liquidation. The warning triggered an immediate panic inside William Birkin, his scientific confidence completely shattering under the voice. He realized that his entire corporate position and the upcoming G-Virus project were threatened by a ghost. He spent his hours pacing the floorboards, his mind unable to calculate a defense against the old man. The stolen legacy wasn't a secure shield anymore, turning into a noose that was tightening around his neck. Wesker managed his reaction with a flat indifference, his dark sunglasses hiding his eyes from the camera feed. He evaluated the transmission as a tactical cue to finalize his defection from the company's failing network. He didn't waste time trying to save his partner, his mind already focused on his own survival tracks. The mansion laboratories weren't a safe haven anymore, and he prepared to exit the sector before the blast. The irony of the situation was that the warning arrived too late for either disciple to alter things. The corporate machinery they had served had already been compromised by the fluid leak inside the ventilation shafts. They were trapped inside a game that had been written by their master 10 years earlier in blood. The entity didn't stay on the screen, cutting the feed to leave the command room in total dark. The transmission finalized the psychological isolation of the two researchers, forcing them to split their remaining forces. Birkin retreated to his deep city lab to protect his samples, while Wesker moved to lure teams. They weren't the elite heirs of the brand anymore, transforming into targets running from an apex predator. The old man's vengeance was moving through the mountains, its progress clear as the night hours closed. Break time 2/Part 33. Rebecca Chambers, A&D Billy Cohen, Special Tactics and Rescue Service rookie, Rebecca Chambers, and escaped military prisoner Billy Cohen crossed paths inside. They represented the absolute worst variables for the Marcus entity's grand campaign across the regional facility blocks. They possessed no structural ties to Umbrella's corporate hierarchy, their motives detached from the company's financial tracks. They were ordinary individuals fighting for pure survival within a territory that wasn't designed for civilian life. The young officer carried a standard medical kit and a basic sidearm, her training thin under pressure. Billy brought a heavy military discipline to the Alliance, his combat reflexes allowing them to clear the cars. They formed a temporary partnership built on mutual need, ignoring the legal warrants that separated their backgrounds. They weren't going to surrender to the monsters in the dark, their steps moving toward the platform. They navigated the layout of the training facility together, solving the mechanical puzzles that guarded the vault. They bypassed the water locks and the chess keys, their progress disrupting the structured routine of defense. The entity viewed them as an uncoordinated nuisance that didn't belong inside his grand historical theater of revenge. He directed his swarms to isolate them, but the outsiders refused to halt their march across the floors. The presence of these two characters turned his calculated campaign into a messy, unpredictable firefight through tunnels. They didn't fall before the Eliminator packs or the Plague Crawlers, using their remaining ammunition to clear rooms. Rebecca recorded the taxonomy metrics of the creatures in her notebook, tracking their vulnerabilities with sharp focus. The parasites couldn't break their defensive line, their acidic bile failing to dissolve the team's tactical gear. The entity tried to isolate them using the automated gate controls, but their constant mobility broke lines. They weren't the corporate targets he had marked for execution, yet their pursuit brought them to the core. The stone floors were covered in the calcified remains of the biological weapons they destroyed along the way. Every room they breached brought them closer to the secret laboratory where the queen parasite managed the hive. As the morning hour neared, they reached the lowest water treatment vaults beneath the facility foundations completely. They were exhausted, their ammunition pouches nearly empty after hours of continuous engagement against the gathering swarm. The entity stood on the central platform, waiting for their approach, his human mask beginning to fade away. The duel wasn't going to follow his corporate script, turning into a raw battle for survival inside rock. Part 34, The Underground Confrontation. Rebecca and Billy cornered the entity inside the deep water treatment vaults during the early morning hours. Driven into a fanatical frenzy by their persistent intrusion, the creature shed its youthful human skin completely. The human facade didn't hold its structure, its cells dissolving into a gargantuan, translucent queen leech monster. The biological titan occupied the entire floor space of the arena, its formless mass pulsing with raw power. The monster featured a soft hide that absorbed standard handgun rounds with a flat indifference across the grates. It used its massive weight to shatter the iron support pillars, attempting to crush the survivors into fluid. The environment was thick with the scent of raw virus and old rust as the masonry caved in. The team couldn't maintain a stationary posture, their boots slipping on the wet steel as they fired. The young officer noted a critical vulnerability while dodging the creature's sweeping attacks near the main tank. The parasite's mutated tissue suffered immediate cellular shock when exposed to direct daylight from the upper shafts. The ultraviolet rays disrupted the polarity of the combined cells, causing the translucent skin to blister and crack. She realized that the dark vault wasn't a permanent shield, operating as the only barrier that kept the monster's internal structure stable. Billy used his remaining physical strength to operate the heavy manual winches built into the wall panels. He forced the massive roof hatches to open with a grinding roar that echoed through the lower block. The morning sun streamed into the deep vault, the bright light hitting the hide of the thrashing beast. The creature didn't have a defense against the clean rays, its mass fracturing under the thermal impact. The ex-soldier hoisted his heavy magnum weapon, lining up his crosshairs on the exposed core of the parasite. He delivered a terminal shot that split the main nerve center, the high-velocity round fracturing the tissue. The broken mass collapsed into the deep abyss of the waste channel as the facility prepared to blow. The entity didn't leave a single trace of its human memory behind, dissolving into the dark fluid below. The survivors scrambled up the iron ladder to reach the surface perimeter before the explosives could detonate. Behind them, the old training facility vanished into a massive cloud of fire and stone debris completely. The queen parasite was destroyed, its research files and custom collection vats reduced to ash under the sky. The battle wasn't a victory for the company, leaving the mountain trails empty as the smoke cleared away. Part 35, The Legacy. Though its physical form was vaporized inside the treatment vaults, James Marcus won his long war anyway. His initial leak of the T-virus into the ventilation shafts directly caused the destruction of the mansion. The incident exposed the company's covert weapons program to the public, stripping away their layer of legal protection. The executive board couldn't contain the fallout of his release, their control over the sector completely failing. The downstream consequences of his actions expanded past the mountain trails to reach the streets of Raccoon City. The viral leaks from the ruined mansion entered the city's water supply and underground sewer networks rapidly. The infection triggered a massive outbreak that consumed a population of 100,000 people within days. The local administration didn't possess the resources to manage the hazard, forcing a quarantine perimeter around lines. The disaster finalized the destruction of the brand as a legitimate pharmaceutical company on the public markets. The United States government approved a thermobaric missile strike to sanitize the province, erasing the buildings completely. The corporate records went up with the masonry, but the public exposure triggered global trials for executives. The administrative shield wasn't enough to save the firm from the legal penalties that followed the slaughter. The company officially dissolved in 2003, its assets seized by the international court systems. Marcus's vengeful spirit had achieved its goal, tearing down the structure that had stolen his life's work. The corporate mask was gone, replaced by a global bioterror era, where his formulas became marketable assets. The world wasn't getting any safer, simply trading the old virus strains for a new generation of hazards. Years later, the final circle of the conspiracy collapsed inside a remote European castle under his legacy. A corrupted Albert Wesker permanently executed an aging, defenseless Oswell Spencer in his private chair rooms. The student who carried out the assassination didn't act out of loyalty to a national defense code. He was operating on the precise rules of force he had learned inside the training facility basements. The virus that a reclusive scientist built inside a mountain school outlasted every person in that cave. The research changed hands, but continued to pollute the next 30 years of human security across continents. The old man was dead, but his hatred had written the script for the future of warfare. The legacy wasn't a closed book, its fire burning long after the founders had turned to dust. Dude,